Hello everyone and welcome back to this episode of the Queer Disrupt podcast. I'm glad you've joined us back again. If you have missed it, this is the second of a 5-part season. So go back and listen to the first one, which is called The Butter Knife, and hopefully it will get you up to date with everything. This episode I am tongue-in-cheek calling We're All Paypigs and the Abuse of Capitalism. And we are joined by wonderful and incredible and fascinating speaker Lucy Sweetkill, who is a professional New York Dominatrix, to talk about BDSM in practice. Just a heads up on this one, we talk a lot about potential abuse, although it isn't too heavy and we don't go into a massive amount of depth on it. I just wanted to give you that kind of content note there. And later on we'll talk a little bit about kind of racial objectification as Lucy discusses her experience as a Vietnamese American dominatrix. I'm so glad you're back. Let us know your thoughts, your feelings and so on from your episode thoughts here and the previous episode. As of next week, we'll be introducing a survey with the podcast notes. So hopefully you can let us know your thoughts more kind of formally there. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy. Hello everyone and welcome back to, this is going to be our second podcast, but I think it's the last one recorded, and I am joined by the absolutely incredible, fabulous and beautiful Lucy Sweetkill, who is a professional dom based in New York City, I believe. But Lucy, do you want to introduce yourself, let our listeners know? How do you want to be known?
Sure. My name is Lucy Sweetkill. A lot of people call me either Mistress Lucy Sweetkill or Daddy Lucy Sweetkill. I am a professional dominatrix in New York City. I've been a professional dominatrix for 11 years. Actually, in November of 2021, just celebrated my 11-year anniversary. And I am also a life coach with more of a focus within kink and BDSM. Some have definitely called me a BDSM and kink educator as well. And, you know, I am open to taking that title.
Brilliant. When I was looking at your website, I was really struck actually by the amount of just, for want of a better phrase, raw information you had on there for people to consume. Like you had like a full breakdown of like, right, these are what these terms means. This is what this is what isn't it. And I was like, this is good. And there were things in there like,
thank you.
I'd like to think I'm relatively in the know on a lot of these things. And there were things in there I was like, bloody hell. What is that? I was like fascinated. I loved it. So do check out the website because it's incredible. I guess I kind of want to get straight into the questions because I'll explain, because obviously you weren't there, off the back of the podcast we've just done, where the podcast I've recorded was looking at, albeit in a UK context, a lot about kind of laws and kind of the way things like laws and rules and regulations often used to kind of control bodies, particularly kind of women, people of color, queer, disabled bodies, and so on. And obviously boundaries and rules and regulations are exceptionally important in kind of BDSM and kink and so on, but they don't always align up with, for example, what the law or what society says should and shouldn't be like done. Does that make sense as a kind of a...
Yes.
So my question for you was, when it comes to kind of negotiating boundaries, how do you negotiate them, and how do you negotiate requests which perhaps you might be okay with, but society goes, or do, like, could you just explain a little bit like how that works in practice for you? Is that okay?
Yes. So it's interesting. I think it's great that you bring up, the UK versus the United States. Obviously, every country has their own laws and rules. And even within these legal laws, it's almost like jaywalking is illegal, but people still do it type of thing. Like, yeah, could you get a ticket? But really, is someone actually going to stop you for that?
So can I just clarify? So
Yeah.
jaywalking, I know what it is. We don't have that term over in the UK. So
Oh,
no, it's okay. But just for our
yeah.
UK listeners and those around the world, could you just explain what you mean by jaywalking specifically? Sorry.
Yeah. So it's like crossing the street at like non-sectioned areas or sometimes at in a diagonal that you're not supposed to. So basically like going outside of the lines, right?
That's
So technically,
hilarious.
yeah. But it's also like people run red lights if or don't stop at a stop sign fully, right? Technically, it's illegal. Technically, you could get a ticket, but if no one catches you, does anyone really care? And even if a cop does catch you, do they sometimes care? Sometimes they don't, right? So it's interesting to discuss legality as a point of ethics because laws change often. And I like to use, when I talk about sex work, sometimes I like to use an example of marijuana use in the United States specifically, because as many people do know, many different states in the US have legalized marijuana. And that didn't used to be the case, right? That you would get these huge, like, there are people who are still in jail for selling marijuana, like 20, 30 years in jail for selling a gram of marijuana, which is now legal in many states, right? So this is actually a really prime example of how laws can change, which then can change cultural perception. Now it's much more okay. Like I speak to grandmas who are like, oh yeah, I'm going to get some weed at the store, just like getting a bottle of wine. So it's not something where if especially in a state like California and New York just legalized marijuana, you don't have people judging you the same way anymore, right? If you're like, oh, I'm going to go smoke a joint outside in California, there are going to be people of all age ranges who most probably will join you, who are not going to judge you. So I don't the conversation around legality and like ethics or what's right or wrong is sort of an interesting conversation because we've seen how laws have changed. I mean, not that long ago in the US, it was illegal for, women to vote. It was, all of these things. So I just kind of, that's a little tangent, but it is an interesting conversation when people are like, well, this is not really legal. Yeah, but that doesn't determine whether something is okay or not okay.
I
Right.
agree, and I think you explained that wonderfully. Again, I've recorded these out of chronology,
Yeah.
but the next episode after this builds
Yeah.
really nicely on this, which is it's actually a friend of mine who is completely anonymous, so as far as I'm going on
Yeah.
that description, but he's really into kind of fisting, right?
Yeah.
Which isn't in and of itself illegal, but carries this kind of social kind of
Yeah.
taboo and prohibition on it. But yeah, how do you, I guess the question is, if we accept that these kind of, depending on what kind of framework you're looking at, under legal,
Yeah.
moral, ethical, etc., because as you said, these things change, particularly in the legal framework. How do you negotiate those boundaries, or how do you, for example, discuss with, is client the correct word? Sorry.
Well, yeah, you can use clients, subs, it really depends.
So
Uh,
and again, please correct me if I'm wrong. You are a dom who doesn't engage in kind of penetrative sex or anything like that. How do you engage with those boundaries when, if someone wants more or wants less, and how do you
yeah.
negotiate them depending?
All right. So this is definitely a complex question. And I'm just going to be really honest about it because which some people may not be so honest about it. So sex work of many different kinds run a spectrum in the United States specifically in regards to what's legal and what's not legal. That is not only dependent on the country itself, but also state by state, and then also city by city. Some cities have actually just recently had pretty much like prosecutors, like in New York specifically, have said that they were not going to prosecute consensual sex work. Yes, technically it's still illegal, aspects of it, not like strippers, but certain types of sex work is illegal, but they're just not going to prosecute because of the political climate around it, you know, in regards to consenting adults. A lot of people who are doing survival sex work, they do it to survive and so forth. So that is going to lead into what I'm going to say next, which is why I'm going to be really transparent about this is because what I do, there's a handful of things I do that are straight up totally fine and straight up legal, right? Like if I was to do foot worship sessions, you know, someone worshiping my feet. There are other acts that are going to be more involved, you know, and let's just take one of them, fisting, which in the United States, if you use anything on someone else that is penetrative, no matter what it is, depending on the state, depending, you know, but for the most part, I believe in the US, if you use anything to penetrate someone else with an exchange of money, unless you are recording some sort of porn, you know, which then is a whole other aspect of this industry, which is crazy, is I believe technically illegal. And so there's a lot of gray in all of this. Like, what do you define as penetrative? Okay, let's take body parts out, right? And let's think about using a dildo, you know? So technically, I think you can be in the room with someone and tell them to use the dildo on themselves. Like, it's kind of crazy. It's really that's that's why but if you record it and you are recording it for porn purposes, then it's not illegal.
That's completely fine, of course. For some strange reason, of course.
And for some strange reason, that's okay. So then it's really crazy. So that it's a very complex, first off, it's an industry that obviously exists. Sex work is a huge industry, whether that's strippers, into sugar babies, into porn stars or amateur porn people, into camming, into escorts, into, you know, doms. It's a huge industry that makes tons of money, tons of it underground, tons of it legally, you know. It's really hard to say. And in regards to me specifically and how I negotiate my boundaries is, first off, I run my business like any other business. It just has a little more unique aspects to it. And how I go about it, though, is, and this I would say is kind of industry standard too, is most of us have a website, just like many other businesses. And in my website, I have a submission form. And basically, you go onto my website, you find me, you can find me on social media, you can, you know, if you look up keywords, when you're starting to search to see someone, you end up, you know, Google is your friend. You're going to find what you need. You can put your city in and put in professional dominatrix and things are going to come up, right? Or if you're already watching stuff, you know, your interest will lead you to, if you want to actually experience this in real life. And then from there, when someone finds me, you know, they read my website, hopefully, and they fill out my form. My form has lots of questions in there to make sure that we're going to be compatible. And only because you fill out my form does not mean that I'm going to agree. I have to make sure that we're going to be compatible. And through the form, when I get the form via email, I will go through it, and it's basically an application because, again, we're talking about power dynamics here. So someone reaching out to me is not just a client. They are reaching out in respect and support for the power dynamic, not only in what I'm offering as a dominant, but also my experience as a pro-dom and a kinkster and so forth. So
yeah, it's a safety thing amongst many other things for both you and anyone who's submitting.
And then after that, I look at it. I determine whether we're going to be, that I'm interested, like, oh, this person's interest aligns with mine. And then they have to go through a screening process. So that screening process varies for all types of sex work. And for those of you who are interested in, be expected, to go through a screening process, be expected to have to give up some type of information, maybe have to have a consultation of some kind. And these are normal practices for both sides, not only for the safety of us, as because I do see many cis men, the safety of the provider, but also it's good for the client, the sub, the person on the other side, because through these consultations and through these hoops you think you're having to jump through, it makes sure that you guys are going to have a good time together, that there is going to be some compatibility. It's also an opportunity for, when I do my consultations, it's part of my screening process. My clients get an opportunity to ask me questions to see if I'm a right fit for them too, and to make sure that I'm a real live person. And that, not something,
not shady, whatever,
shady
scamming
is gonna
people out of money or anything.
Yeah. And so then after that, after my consultations, usually I determine whether, like, oh, now that we talked, are we still a good fit? And then I'll move them forward, or I'll say, like, I just don't think we're going to be a good fit. And that's a good thing, because you don't want to see someone who doesn't want to see you.
And they can find someone who is a good fit.
Yeah, who is a good fit. And so that's all part of the negotiating boundaries, because part of that conversation, like in my form, it says, what are your limits, right? What are your interests? What are your limits? And part of my consultation is for us to talk about that too, because things in writing can get misconstrued. So it's also good to speak about them. And then after going through all that, and there has been an agreement, and you're able to book an appointment with me, all new clients start off with a beginning conversation. And that's something very specific to kink and BDSM. Before you ever start a scene, yes, we wrote each other, we spoke to each other most probably on the phone, and now you're seeing me in person. But it's still important for us to do a quick, 5-minute check-in at the beginning of our scene to confirm that what you wrote and what we talked about was still clear. So it's almost like a 3-check system, right? Like,
it's very rigorous. And that's a good thing. I want to be clear. It's a very rigorous breakdown. Yeah.
Because you're also playing with some possibly dangerous things, tying someone up or anything like that, or you could be dealing with something psychologically, that it's important that if we're going to play, let's say, with humiliation, which can be psychologically damaging if not played with correctly, I need to make sure that I'm not going to be hitting some triggers, right? But also on the day of your appointment, let's say the night before you tripped and hurt your ankle, and one of the things you wanted to do was to be suspended, then we might not do that, right? And so it's all kind of a way to check in. And so even for subs and clients that I've seen a long time, every appointment, we take a few minutes at the beginning to just check in. Like, how do you feel emotionally? How do you feel physically? Because some days, let's say the last time I played with this person, we did some heavy pain scene, but maybe they're just not in that emotional and physical state that day. And so we're not going to maybe go as hard as we did before. Every day is different. So that is also part of the negotiating boundaries, because only because we did something last time that was intense doesn't mean my sub or my client has given consent for that to happen this time.
Yeah, consent is a conversation. It is always a conversation.
And it's ongoing. Yeah.
It's not a case of, I've signed off on this, therefore. That's not how that. And I think it's really interesting we're talking about limits. It's coming up in the next episode with my friend who's kind of into fisting. But me and him spoke about when we've met up with people who actually, my friend's got a phrase saying he's allergic to bad kink, which is, which
what does that mean, though?
It's a good one, and basically a lot of that is people who just haven't done the thinking, which I think your kind of your consultation form obviously makes you do that thinking. One of my
Yeah.
biggest pet peeves personally is when I see someone on something like Grindr, for example, and they're like, "No limit sub." It's like bullshit. Yes, you do. Like
Such bullshit.
yeah, the second someone says that, I'm like, I'm not interested because you actually haven't thought about this. It's just absolute, it's bullshit, as you said. Everyone has a limit. It depends, but everyone has a limit, and as you said, it's bullshit if they say they don't. Ludicrous. I'm so glad you said that. I was like, yes, good.
Yeah, that's actually a red flag.
Yeah.
When, as a professional, when someone says no limits, there's a difference between someone saying I'm not sure of my limits, and then there is the person who says no limits. It's always a red flag, because it means, yeah, they haven't thought about it, they're being careless, and they're stuck in this fantasy world.
Yeah. Yes. People. So again, this leads so brilliantly onto the next conversation I had in the next podcast. But it's this kind of people who have seen something on like Pornhub or something, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, this is really good. And actually, they're like, oh, actually, this isn't. I don't want to say it's not very good, but it's not very good for them. It's like, oh, this isn't what I expected or what I wanted. And it's like, well, yeah, porn is different from actual.
It's movie magic.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I don't think I've ever had anyone spell it out, articulated in quite a clear way to me before, and it's kind of those things where I've kind of assumed it's there, but I've never really gone through that. I have a question, and of course, feel free to just be like, I'm not gonna answer. But like, out of the amount of people who apply, how many do you reckon you end up seeing in kind of like 1 in 2, 1 in 5, 1 in 10, more?
Oh, that's really hard. It's really hard because I also get so much bullshit email too, like things that say like, are you a veil mish? And I'm just like, no, I just don't even respond to that. So this is the other thing about this business that some people do not understand. The amount of bullshit you get in this business compared to how people behave in other lines, like you wouldn't. I just don't
can believe
think,
it.
Yeah. So you just would never get, and so that it makes it really hard to actually understand the scope if you're trying to analyze your business. Because let's think about like a lawyer, I guarantee you, if someone is reaching out to a lawyer for their business and their expertise, right? They're an expert within their realm. I guarantee you, people are not emailing the lawyer saying, are you a veil? Or other, they're taking time in trying to hire this professional. But sex work is looked at differently, maybe because of the legal standpoint, maybe because of the subject matter, who knows? But
we don't as a non-professional, we
don't get treated professionally by many, and people think it's appropriate to send professional emails that are like, are you a veil, or how much, and that's all. I was like, you would not do that to any other profession. Why do you think that's okay? And then why do you think that's going to start us off on a good foot?
Yeah, so I it's not sex work at all, and I'm just drawing like a parallel from my own life. I'm a professional drag queen as well, and the amount of times people just take the piss, because I think part of it, again, it's that subject matter. Or one of the things that get me is when someone comes up and physically touches or grabs me.
Yeah,
that kind of grabs. It's often either if I'm padded or even not, like my chest, as if I've got breasts or not, but also my crotch, because they want to know like, oh, is it there? Is it not? And then they're like, oh, they do that, and they're like, can we have a picture? Like, no, fuck off. You just me.
Touched
fuck
me.
Like, absolutely not. Or like the other ones where it's like, oh, I just saw you perform. This wasn't to me, this was actually to a couple of other friends I was with, and I couldn't believe it. The guy was like, oh, that was a really shit performance. Can I get a picture though? And they were like, fuck off. Like, absolutely not. Like, no. Like that, and they're like professional working. They are professionals doing what they do. You know what I mean? And for the record, the
Yes.
performance I give was not shit, just in case they ever listen to this. Because they'll remember it was actually a really hard crowd and did an amazing job. But like, yeah, it's that kind of, it's not, but it's often perceived as more frivolous, heavy on the quotation marks for those listening, frivolous kind of professions. There's just a kind of a weird boundary that just is not respected. And at the end of the day, like, A, we are people still, and B, this is a business. Treat it like a damn business.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you're arriving to that business professionally, like as a drag queen, you're like, I've got my makeup on, I've got my stuff, I'm here to perform, I came on time, I did my rehearsals, I did my thing. And if you're treating it and you're being professional as an entertainer, then like, it's just somehow these concepts go out of their, because they don't see it as valid work. And so they think that that behavior is okay. And then also I find it really interesting for like my line of work, because I'm like, okay, you're literally reaching out, hoping that I will interact with you, right? You want to have a session with me, and this is how you want to start it off. And you think this is going to be the good start to whatever interaction we're going to have.
Like, this is how you're pitching this. This is how you're coming. Like, this is what you've got. Yeah. This is the best you've got, is it? Okay.
So, so that's always like that's like me going into a restaurant, coming in, being a total asshole, and then wondering if they were going to spit in my food. Most probably yes. Right? Like, this is not going to turn out well for me. Like, if I came into a restaurant and just like, why don't you have da-da-da, and why am I paying this, and whatever, and just respecting all the procedures that this restaurant has in place, and then expecting like just an amazing situation. I guarantee
being surprised when it doesn't go their way. Okay, well, just to build off this, because I think there's something really interesting here. You mentioned about this kind of, I want to go back to this kind of conversation that you were talking about at the beginning, that kind of check-in, right? Which again, fantastic, incredible, great. I mean, I have nothing more to say than that. I'm kind of interested in the sense of kind of, that's obviously a level of care kind of before. How do you engage with kind of, I guess this is more of a logistical question, care kind of during or particularly after? Because aftercare is a conversation that when I was kind of thinking about this kind of podcast series with people, a lot of people ask me like, oh, are you going to talk about aftercare? Are you going to talk about this? Are you going to talk about that? So I'm kind of interested on, I don't want to say like your take on aftercare, but I'm interested in what your thoughts are surrounding that, or how we might engage with that in a kind of a safe way. Just to say, like I mentioned it in an email to you, but your sign off on emails is stay safe and kinky, which I think is fantastic. I love it. So I guess it's to kind of extrapolate. What does that mean in practice, I guess? Yeah.
So aftercare, actually during care and aftercare, right, is they seem straightforward in kind of the words and the concept, but we actually don't apply a lot of that in life in general, and any sexual interaction or emotional interaction. And I have this sort of, when I check in with the sub, so I actually do various forms of aftercare, which is a combination of what happens directly after a scene as it ends, right? So a bit of aftercare that I do right after a scene for most everyone, because every scene is different. And some scenes are much more physically intense. Some scenes are much more emotionally intense. Some are a combination of both. And some are just really lighthearted, even if they're physically and emotionally intense. And it's individual. Some people like a lot of aftercare, others don't. And then when you talk about the professional realm, that's a little different too, because there are time limits. And so if you engage in play and kink play with someone on a personal level, then you're going to maybe do a little more aftercare, because you have this, you have more time, right, to do it. Like literally, you actually most probably have more time to do it. While on a professional level, it sort of has to wrap up within a certain amount of time out of respect of like the time. And for those who want a lot of aftercare, my subs know to just schedule more time with me. So if you need a lot of aftercare, then I have clients who will schedule 2.5 hours with me, and our play will be 2 hours, and then it'll be 30 minutes of aftercare. And that's cool. Or we do they'll schedule some sort of social time with me. Like we'll do our 2 hours of play and then have dinner afterwards, which is a form of aftercare where we get to like chill out, talk like normal human beings, have a meal together, just enjoy replenishing our physical body, which after play can be really exhausting. So being hungry or maybe having a glass of wine afterwards may be something you want to do, and just connecting on a basic level. So that is a form of aftercare. The basics that I do right afterwards, though, is that it's all about like removing whatever is on them. So let's say we have done a lot of bondage. So even you're not just like ripping stuff off of them because the scene ended, right? It's kind of like unwrapping slowly to bring back out a little bit of like, if they're laying down, right, or whatever position. So if they've been standing up, maybe it's getting them on the ground. Maybe that means sitting down where you're in a relaxed state, or laying down. If they've been laying down, maybe that is just allowing them to lay there, breathe a little as they sort of get themselves back into reality, emotionally, physically, as things are either being unwrapped off of them or taken off or cleaned off or whatever. And then for most, I always offer like them to go take a shower, because a shower is a really great cleansing sort of ritual. Most people after having a warm shower feel like they're in a better state, and if, and some scenes require it. Some scenes you're really sweaty, and then, having some water. And then, just kind of doing a little breathing and checking in. And then for some, because I do play with heavy pain, sometimes that's dressing any wounds, whether that's putting antibiotic cream on, putting Band-Aids on if necessary, if we've done something intense that has a little bit of blood involved. So it's just doing all of that, allowing them to like get themselves back together. And so in a professional scene, that's usually how it might end for them, and then they would leave. So that could be 5-10 minutes depending, right? And a lot of people understand that because they know that there's a limited space and time when you're seeing someone on a professional level, but that's sometimes all you need. They might be leaving in this state of floating, right? I do check in after a day or two for a lot of, especially new clients, but even if it's been in an intense scene, I always, check in. I do ask people to check in with me too. Just let me know how you're doing in a few days. And usually my check-in gives some instructions. I talk about what aftercare is a lot of times for those, especially if they're newer, who maybe don't know. And aftercare is something that's not only reserved for the end of the scene, but includes what happens after you walk out that door. So, this is something I tell people, which is like part of aftercare is self-care, which means stuff they need to do as a sub, especially if they've done a really intense scene. They need to give themselves a bit of aftercare too. It's like, eating healthy, getting a lot of fluids, exercising, kind of keeping your body in a good place, as well as participating in enjoyable activities, which can kind of keep you from having like a sub drop. So aftercare is something that is for both people to keep in mind too, things that you do for yourself as well. And then me checking in with them after a few days can be a sort of communication aftercare, where it allows them to respond with things they really enjoyed or things that they've processed that maybe we want to adjust or shift. Every play is a learning lesson for both of us, especially if we tried something new and it didn't work out, and that's okay. That's the whole point of play and exploration. Sometimes you're going to do an activity because, again, you may have seen it on porn and were interested, and then we tried something new, and you might go, oh, I guess that's not really for me. Like I thought this activity I would enjoy, and actually I really didn't enjoy it. Or, oh, I enjoyed it to this extent, but now I kind of know where my limits are, right? So play is all about, it's not about right or wrong. It's about exploring and figuring out what you enjoy and maybe not enjoy, and maybe could you enjoy it in a different context. Anyone who's ever listened to me do a podcast, I actually talk about kink and BDSM, and play is like food. You don't know until you try it. The ingredients come in many different ways. And so you may not like it in one dish, but you may like it in a different dish. Who you do it with matters. So who you dine with matters. That can really change your, perception of the experience, right? And one bad day doesn't mean that chef is shit.
Yeah, but also I guess like how you're feeling.
You can even,
like you might really fancy pizza one day. And like to use a clumsy metaphor, but yeah, it's a really brilliant metaphor.
Yeah. And then you might not want to have pizza all the time, even though you loved having pizza the other day. And again, like sometimes you have off days too, where like, so even on the top side, some days I'm having an off day and I might not go about something as best as maybe another day. And it's important that my clients and my subs understand that I'm human as well. And some days I'm not having my best days, and doesn't mean that all of a sudden, like I'm just a shit dominatrix, right? And that is the advice I give to new doms too. You're going to fuck up. You're going to mess up. And as long as you're careful around, we don't want permanent damage, but you're not going to, there's been times where I'm having a scene and I trip in my heels, and, that's not very dominant and sexy to just like fumble on the ground in my, 6-7 inch pleasers, but it happens. I've dropped a ball weight on my toe, and man, like it's just, shit happens. And you have to laugh about it, and your good subs will understand that.
Yeah,
too.
And I guess this goes back to the idea of, I guess part of this kind of screening process is a kind of managing expectations as well.
Yeah.
And what that includes. And yet you are human. Like you said, we are human beings. I know it's not the same, but to draw to my drag performance, I could do the same show at 3 different places and I might feel like one's shit, but that doesn't mean I'm a shit performer. It just means that particular show wasn't as good as perhaps the second or third show or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
I agree.
So you've spoken a lot about kind of this kind of a lot of the kind of self-care that you mentioned and the aftercare and so on was in particular relation to kind of quite physical, i.e. if there's a scene which has drawn blood, a band-aid, amongst other things, of course. What about when you're engaging more kind of, I guess, psychological, like you mentioned humiliation can sometimes trigger, or perhaps scenarios where, I think I might have actually learnt this from your website, tunnel games, like games where once you're involved, you can't really get out of it, if that makes sense.
So, well, there's like predicaments, there's gameplays, there's, the psychological level, psychological play ranges so much. And for some people, it's just engaging in it can be really cathartic, right? That requires very little aftercare for some people. Like they know what they're engaging in, they know when it ends, and they know that it's like within this box, right? And so once that container is done, they're kind of like, I'm good. I played out this thing that I needed to, it's in this container and, and I'm good. And I feel more emotional release from it. And that in itself, that's the thing is, engaging in kink and BDSM, seeing a professional dom is for a lot of clients, their self-care. It's like getting a massage. It's a bit of their self-care. They get to engage in their sexuality in a way that they aren't many people aren't able to do on a day-to-day basis or even a monthly basis or in their regular life at all. So, their engagement with me sometimes can actually be part of their self-care, which then in a way sometimes doesn't require much aftercare for them. It is very specific to the person.
Yeah. So
but part of what I was
So I was going to say, so like that's a kind of an opportunity to kind of, yeah, as you said, cathartic, but in a kind of a safe, controlled space.
Yeah.
Rather than engaging with it perhaps in a more dangerous or I don't want to say unregulated, because again it carries all the connotations, but a space where essentially they've hired a professional to help them facilitate what they need for their own self-care. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah.
Have I just completely missed the mark there?
No, I think some people, there are different reasons why someone would see a professional dominatrix. I find that the most common is the fact that they are kinky, submissive individuals who do not get to honor that part of themselves in their general lives. And because they don't get to honor that part of themselves, this is the time that they're setting aside by having their appointment, whether that's once a week, whether that's monthly, to get to honor that part of themselves. It's almost like a mental vacation for them. But it is also, it's part of your identity and sexuality. And if you don't get to express part of your identity and sexuality because you're always having to hide it, then that can be really, that can cause a lot of emotional distress. So sometimes having their appointment is the pleasure they're bringing into their life. And so for some people, they don't need any aftercare, even when something is emotionally intense, because it's almost like that's what they're seeking, right? It's kind of like someone who seeks a really, acupressure is really painful type of massage. It's like getting in there, and it's so painful during it, but afterward, because like, hey, I'm going to do an acupressure appointment. I know I'm going to be sweating through this whole appointment, gritting my teeth, trying to breathe through this pain. But afterwards, my body's going to feel freaking amazing, right? And then I just kind of know that I most probably will have bruising just from that deep pressure. And so I think some people come in knowing that I'm going to give up control. I'm going to engage in something really emotionally intense. But afterwards, I'm going to feel so much relief and enjoy. And then a lot of times maybe don't need any like aftercare beyond, but I always still suggest like, make sure to eat healthy, make sure to spend time with people that, put you in a good mood, or do activities that put you in a good mood, right? So take care of yourself emotionally. I still recommend that no matter what, right? So, but psychological aftercare for people who engage in something much more psychological, I don't think is any different than the aftercare for someone who engages something more physically intense. I think they're very one and the same. Yeah, you may not be putting like a physical bandage over you, but the same thing of like kind of, breathing, having a shower after a scene, even if we didn't do anything physically intense, is just a good way of like coming out refreshed, having some water, having a meal maybe together, or just going home and, watching a movie and relaxing after that scene. Some people like to journal afterwards. And then, when I check in with them in a few days, or, I do ask that if you would like, in a few days after you've processed our scene, feel free to write me. And that process of writing me around like what you enjoyed, or what some things that you've kind of figured out, or maybe some things that you would adjust, or some things that didn't work for you, that in itself can be really cathartic, right? Because you're processing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all of those things.
Okay. Thank you for that. It leads me really nicely onto my next point, where I'm curious about the ethics surrounding events, acts, scenes, etc., or more ongoing kind of scenarios, which are perhaps more open to abuse. And the example that is particularly coming to mind is, for example, findom, i.e., financial domination. So, if you could, just for those listening, because I think you'll do a significantly better job than me, frankly, if you could explain what that is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is you do engage in that as your kind of professional role, and how do you deal with that, I guess?
So let me first, general definition of financial domination is pretty much what it says. It's dominating someone on a financial level, and that can look and be done in many different ways. But financial domination, it's people who enjoy engaging with power play that has a connection to money specifically, whether that is a taking or a giving or some sort of earning. But if you think about it, financial domination is actually something that we all engage in because we live in a capitalist society.
For those of you who can't see, I'm on video on Zoom. I am like applauding. I was like, "Oh my god, blown my mind! Such a good reading of it. I love it." Sorry, I was cheering in the background.
But it is right.
Yeah, no, you're dead right. You're absolutely correct. That's just capitalism, right? Neoliberal capitalism.
It's just capitalism. It's just capitalism. When we negotiate money, we expect people to pay us a certain thing for different things. For some people, we wonder why there's inequality in who gets paid for the same exact job. It's how you can finagle, negotiate who you know. Like, these are all forms of financial domination and financial power play, so it's not surprising that this idea of financial domination, because so many of us all of us who engage in capitalism, which is all of us, because that is our state of being in this world, right? Our world, right? Because the type of financial kind of situation we live in through capitalism is so traumatic for many of us, I am not surprised that people have eroticized that situation. Just like we eroticize trauma because it's our way of being able to process trauma and engage in trauma in a way where we have much more control, as well as in a safe place of when something happens and when something doesn't happen, right? So I'm not surprised why this sort of like financial domination has started to blow up over the last few years, is because we all engage in money in these like fucked up ways through capitalism. And for me, even though I don't consider myself a financial dominatrix, like, I can't deny that it doesn't get engaged in my line of work in that very clear sense of like, I have subs who want to give me money, but even though it's engaging in their fantasy of financial domination, doesn't mean there hasn't been an exchange. Financial domination doesn't mean there's no exchange. Any type of energy is exchange. The moment we have, the fact that I put out content, even if that content is free, that's where the exchanges. I'm doing some sort of work, even though I've given it out by putting it on social media for free, that allows somebody else to connect with me. And then they have a fantasy of financial domination. And then let's say they send me money, but they got something out of it. Actually, they got some content. Yeah, they want it. Yeah. And so it may not be as clear as, here, I'm giving you money for this orange, and now you give me the orange, right? But there is always some sort of trade, as much as people don't think. It's just not as clear.
Yeah, because one of the things that came into my mind with this is, I hate sort of revealing the weird, obnoxious, strange producer kind of behind the scenes stuff, but for the listeners, I was obviously looking up Lucy online, and on Lucy's Twitter, Lucy has put out a Amazon wish list of like wine glasses. I remember thinking, oh, they're very nice champagne flutes. But again, I was thinking, so how do you kind of negotiate that if a stranger does it? But you're right, the trade is there. You are producing that and going, you're making yourself available for someone to engage with you in a certain way. And I guess that's where that comes in. And I think, wow.
Yeah, they're getting something, even if it's that like scratching their little financial domination itch, right? By saying, oh, she's asking me to get something. I guarantee you that somebody's jerking off to that too. So you're obviously getting something for it.
Someone's getting their kicks from it. Yeah, it's the short answer. Yeah, you're dead.
Yeah. And it's kind of the same thing of it's how we determine what is valuable as work. That's the fucked up thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because women specifically have been dealing with this for so long, right? Where it's like, well, you don't work. I guarantee you, my mother who raised, 2 kids, like that's fucking work, right?
It's the unpaid emotional labor, and physical labor. Yeah.
It's the unpaid, exactly that, unpaid emotional and physical labor. It's just because our society doesn't put an actual dollar value, we assume that it has no value, but it has a lot of value.
And that disproportion always falls on women, people of color. It always falls on the more marginalized people in society, always, without a shadow of whatever society you look at, right?
Yeah. And sexual energy. Yeah. That sort of desire, filling someone's desires, filling their fantasy, all of that is still valuable, right? The fact that because someone saw a photo of me and they're worshiping it, and I guarantee you most probably has gotten off on the random 1 million photos that are out there, right? I've given you something. I gave you a satisfaction because you looked at my content, whether it was free or paid, but a lot of times you most probably looked at a photo of mine and created some sort of fantasy in your head and then enjoyed yourself with that fantasy. So yeah, in some way you should be paying me, right? Because I've given you something and you're not entitled to that. You can get off on whatever you want. You're entitled to get off on whatever you want, right? But like, you're not entitled to my photos. You're not, I choose to put it out there, but they're also making a choice to say, hey, I've been an admirer of yours. I've loved your content, and I've never had a session with you. I've never paid to interact with you, but because of the things you put out there, I'm going to get you a gift because I've enjoyed your content so much. When I guarantee you, they've never seen me in person. So they've never directly paid me, but they've benefited from my existence and from my putting out the content I put. And so many of people will give something for that. Or even if me just writing a message back, right? That's what you see a lot of financial domination as too. Like the simplest form of financial domination that you do see in sex work is some sort of like back and forth engagement. Like, you send them $25, they send you a message or a photo, right? And they tell you like, you're my pay pig, and you get off on the fact that you're being told to pay them money, but you're getting something, you're getting their attention. That is valuable.
Yeah. I think that's, it's valuing one. Well, I guess it's in this case, you're valuing yourself and your own existence and the things that come with that, rather than just going, yeah, you can consume me in its very kind of capitalist way for free, I guess.
Yeah. And it would be same thing as a drag queen, right? It'd be like, yeah, you love this, but you should get paid for it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes you might do a free show, and great if people catch it, but hopefully they tip you, hopefully all these other things.
You're not obliged to that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not a dancing monkey, right?
Yeah.
You're not here to just like, perform for someone because you should, or because they want it, or because they enjoy it, right?
I don't owe it to you. I don't owe this to you. If you want it, you fucking pay me. If you happen to get it for free because I have chosen myself to provide that for free, good for you. But you don't. It's not.
And if they tip you, you don't. Yeah, and if they tip you because they happen to get it for free and they want to tip you, doesn't mean you're required to then do another performance for them, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And gifts are basically tips. That's how I see it as. Like,
it's these really
things are just tips.
Yeah. That's a really good way of thinking about it. Yeah.
But in regards to what you were saying, like getting off that tangent of like, in regards to what you're saying about abuse, this is another nuanced subject, because I hear this a lot, and we've been seeing it, especially in the US. And I don't know, I can't obviously say in the UK, but in the US, there has been a lot of conversation around the 50 Shades of Grey argument in court, right? Like, abusive relationships, or abusive, physically abusive, like intimate engagement, and the defense is that this person was into kink and BDSM and they wanted it, and that's what excuses the abuse, right?
And so it's a known argument here. So we're familiar with that kind of concept here, unfortunately.
So the conversation of abuse is a very critical conversation that is happening within not only sex work, but kink and BDSM. But here's the thing, right? Abuse is possible in, first off, any line of work and anything. We see marriages in, let's talk about just typical heterosexual cis relationships. So someone gets legally married. They're in a full-on cis relationship. They've been together 5 years. Does that mean because they did everything quote unquote societally correct, there's no abuse? Lies, we know. Big Little Lies tells us that, or whatever that show was, where like abuse happens in relationships all the time, in all types of relationships, whether it's friendships, whether that's family relationships, whether that's marriages, whether that's boss employee, whether it does not matter. We see this abuse happens in all types of engagements that have the possibility of any type of power dynamic. Mother, son, mother, daughter, father, son, like we see this, in all forms. Let's take the Catholic Church, like obviously
that's like a whole other podcast series, that
one. But abuse happens, right? No matter what the relationship, no matter what the industry, abuse happens. That has become blatantly clear over the last few years, right? Abuse happens. So
position of president.
Totally.
And anywhere.
So everywhere and anywhere. So it's not about like, ooh, is this industry more susceptible to abuse? Like, it's all susceptible to abuse. Let's talk. It's more a bigger question about why. Why are people taking advantage of other people? What is going on with our society where people get into power of some kind and abuse their place of power? What is happening here, right? I think it's just a larger question on society and human existence, that we're abusing power on all levels, like, or what the hell is going on, right? So I don't think one industry is more susceptible than another, to be honest. I think we're more susceptible of certain types of abuse because we have to be on the underground as sex workers. When you have things that, when you are not allowing people to openly report abuse and care for themselves, or their immigration status is used against them, or the fact that they do some type of work that's not fully legal, when we are holding all those things against people, then abuse is going to happen because no one cares about them, right? Because no one's going to listen to them, and then people don't speak up. So shit like that happens. But abuse on this bigger level, I don't think one industry is more susceptible to the other. I think a lot of abuse in all industries, mainstream industries, go unreported all the fucking time. I have friends who are females in the financial industry, and they've spent their whole careers just shutting the fuck up about the shit they go through because they know it would fuck their careers. To this day, even with everything as popular as the Me Too movement, they still don't feel comfortable. And we're talking some pretty mainstream, industries. So there's a lot of stuff that doesn't get reported. And I think things are kind of blown, people love to sensationalize the possible abuse within kink and BDSM and the different types of activities, which I feel are actually people who engage in BDSM are less likely to engage in abusive behavior because consent. Yeah, because of the work, because of consent, the ongoing conversation around consent. Does abuse happen? Yes, because abuse happens everywhere, and you're just dealing with abusive people. This is just one avenue that they choose to do it in, but I guarantee you they're most probably doing it in other avenues of their life, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's just that. Can I just clarify? I think that's such a brilliant answer. That's such a brilliant way of kind of viewing it. I think the reason in particular I've kind of prompted this was a conversation I've had with someone who said they were in no way kind of shaming it. They just said they didn't get and this is someone who was engaging in it. They just didn't get financial domination, and he was like, "It's fine, it's not for me." But he said he said he was struggling, I think, within himself to understand it because he said of the potential of abuse. But I think you are completely correct. Abuse is prevalent everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Like wherever you can assign power and value and any form of relation in any kind of way, in its most banal way to its most kind of extreme way, abuse is there in some way by someone. Yeah.
And at least with financial domination, there's kind of a barrier, right? Like yes, can it happen? But a lot of times, I don't think you actually see it in these abusive ways because someone has to make a choice of saying, hey, I'm going to send you this money, right? Someone can yell and scream at you on the phone, through text, through all of that as much as they want. Doesn't mean you actually have to press send, right? And a lot of this is being engaged online, which means there is no physical bodies to be like, go to the fucking ATM. No one's putting a gun to someone's head and saying, go into the ATM and like get this money out. Most of financial domination is engaged online. And with that online, there's a bit of protection online, right? You're a bit more anonymous and you don't have to press send, which is actually what happens a lot with financial domination. Is it's not as lucrative as people think it is. I think there's a lot of fantasy around it because people disappear. And I know a lot of financial doms, like I don't engage in traditional, like the online financial dom stuff that I would say is more traditional to those who consider themselves financial dominatrixes, because it's a lot of fucking work, in all honesty. Like I'm not here to have all these back and forth conversations for $25. Like it's actually a lot of work. Like it's a lot of freaking work. Like bravo to the findoms who can put in all that work, and it's great. Like if you have the ability to engage in that level, knowing that a lot of people are just going to randomly drop off. They may send you $100 and then they just disappear. great, because you're always having to bring in new business, right? My
It's a
type of work,
reinvestment again and again of
yeah,
time
and again and
energy.
again and again and again. And I just don't have the capacity for that. Like the type of financial domination I engage in actually ties into my life coaching. And there's ethics, right? So ethical domination within financial domination, like the conversation around ethical domination is always on the table, because again, when you are dealing with power, you need to be ethical around it. And even though, like, the ethics of actual physical engagement, but the emotional engagement, like I have subs who will take a lot more pain for me than they can actually handle. And it's important part for me to say no,
to know
like
their limits for as a
yeah,
dom,
to help. Yeah. But it's also important for them to be adults and use their safe word and have a conversation too. But it's a give take. If I could tell that someone is maybe taking a little more because they want to please me, because now we're in the middle of a scene and they're like massive, subspace and submissive tendency is like fully on its highest, then I understand that they're not in the right mind space, that they just maybe want to, they're in a subspace, right? And so they're in a space where they want to please me even more. As a ethical dom, I have to stop or pull back from a scene. And I do that often on a physical content, on an emotional content, in a context, like with emotional things, I'll be like, no, like, I get that you want to like talk about these things or do these things, but we're not going to, because I don't think this is a healthy place for you to engage in this yet, and this will require us to have more conversation before we play with this very like iffy kind of area for you specifically. And then with financial domination, it's the same thing. Like I do have subs where the financial domination aspect is tied to goals, right? Where they're like, they have goals in regards to things they want to achieve, whether that's a workout schedule, whether that is even, a writing schedule. Subs who are doing like, personal projects, right? That they want to be held accountable. So we tie in a financial aspect to it so that they stay more accountable, right? But it's an agreed upon financial aspect. I have subs who I know are in a financially precarious position where I also know about them that they, suffer from some sort of like, mental health issues, that when they may be, when they're like, for some who are maybe bipolar and who are kind of in a manic state, yeah, they want to maybe engage in very unhealthy behavior, and maybe that might be engaging in certain types of sex work with money they don't have, or and that's no different than someone choosing to buy a bunch of food and eating a bunch of food, or shopping, like there's no regulation on that. So but they may do that. And if I know, then I tell them, I check in and I go, you know what, I'm not sure, I'm not going to confirm this appointment with you, because I need to do a mental health check with you to make sure that you're making this appointment in a clear headspace and not using money you do not have to use. And that's for my clients that, of course, like I don't always know that, right? Because those are some of the clients. You can only
do what you know, of course. You can't.
Yeah.
You're not a fortune teller, of course.
Yeah. And that's something I do with clients that I have a more personal relationship. I've gotten to know them over the years, where I just won't allow them to have an appointment with me, even if they want to, unless we have I still require my work to be paid for. So instead of paying to see me for 2 hours in person, which is definitely a different, amount of money, I might have them do a $100 30-minute phone call with me first to do a check-in, and then say to them like, hey, let's talk about this, and check in before I even allow them to do an appointment, like a full-on appointment, which sometimes that call, instead of them spending a bunch of money, because my time is still should be valued, they spend a lot less, but I sometimes can talk them off that like manic state and get them back into a more grounded place where they then go, you know what, you're right. I'm in a place where I shouldn't be spending this money. I'm so happy to talk to you about this. Okay, let's talk about what you can do for the next few days to kind of bring you back on a more grounded place. And maybe that is like some sort of self kinky play, maybe with some toys they have at home, maybe that, in doing XYZ, some things that they can do on their own, which then instead of, spending $1,000, they ended up only spending $100 to get to a better place, which is a lot more healthy place than where they could have been.
In that case.
So
thank you for, and I genuinely mean this, thank you for such a comprehensive answer to that. Like, I was going to say, thank you for having done the thinking. Well, of course you have. You've been doing this for 11 years, but like, no, thank you for kind of articulating that, I think, in a way which, at least, again, as someone who I kind of regard myself more in the know than most on these kind of areas, even I've not had this quite so articulately laid out to me. So thank you for that, kind of taking that time there. I have just one last question, if that's okay. It's because I'm aware of time. You have identified online and Nightfleur as an Asian dominatrix in the past. And I saw you have written as well before on your role as kind of, I've forgotten the exact words, but essentially an Asian female. Am I right in saying? And there's a fetishization that is often attached to use these clunky, simplistic terms of the West to the East, as it was. And I appreciate they are very loaded terms and complex and difficult terminology to work with. As someone who fits that role, a Western society would often say is the submissive role. We're talking again about these kind of marginalized kind of identities. Has your personal identity and your background ever, I don't want to say interfered, but played a kind of complicated role in your kind of work as a dominatrix as well? And before you answer, I apologize if that was an incredibly clumsily phrased question. I did that really badly.
It's a very good question. It's also a very, again, complex and nuanced question and answer. First, I do want a little shout out. My former business partner, who's also professional dominatrix, Dia Dynasty, we actually did an interview a few years ago for a magazine called Banana Magazine. It is a play on the term, yellow on the outside, white on the inside for those who are, Asian American. It's through some friends who are Asian, which is why they are allowed to use that term banana. That's why they started their magazine, Banana Magazine, about a lot of, it's a very focused for like Asian and Asian American culturally. And so these magazines are really amazing. I do recommend, purchasing them, online, because they cover a lot of really cool, art and food and all kinds of things. But we were in one of their issues, I think issue number 4 that they put out. So they did a whole spread, and it talks about, us being Asian doms, and the idea of Asian fetish. And what does that mean, right? And for me specifically, it's sort of a double-edged sword. It is definitely a love-hate relationship for a few reasons. And first, how I grew up, I was born in the United States. However, my mom and my father, my aunts and uncles are all from Vietnam. They came here during the Vietnam War as, immigrants and everything that was going on. They escaped Vietnam, during this war. And so there are a lot of, I'm first generation, in the United States, being raised by very Asian, very Vietnamese household. so there's a feeling of straddling, right? And how I grew up watching a lot of like American television, all of that, I never felt seen. I actually, I remember being young, wanting to be white, because wanting to be blonde, because I never saw anyone like me on mass media, and there was no real representation, and I was always considered really, a foreigner. And it would happen all the time where, in school, they'd be like, oh, what, do you speak English? I'm like, what are you talking about? So all these things would happen. So I've, over the years, have really learned to feel very proud about being Vietnamese American, about my Vietnamese heritage, about being Asian. And I've learned to really love that about me and value that about me. And so it is something that, yes, I like to be very proud about. And so kind of putting it out there that, I'm, Vietnamese American, I'm a Vietnamese or an Asian dominatrix, there's two parts to that, of like just being proud of myself in that, about my heritage, being proud of my heritage and not hiding that, even though it wasn't represented. I had a lot of like, like a lot of, in a way, shame, just being, Asian, being surrounded by white people. But then at the same time, it's also a marketing thing on a business level. There are people who are going to look for Asian doms. And so, yes, I utilize the fact that I am an Asian dominatrix as a way to like help make me different and all the other a bunch of the other doms. So I do capitalize. Yeah, I capitalize
exactly the same time, capitalizing on what it is, isn't it? Because you live in a capitalist, we all do. We're fucked in this society. So we can, frankly, no?
And so I have to realize that. But the double-edged sword, right, is I don't want to be seen as just a fetish, but I also capitalize on the fact that there are people who fetishize Asian women. And navigating that is tricky, because I sort of try to take my position of power as a way to educate my clients who may have stepped through that door because I'm an Asian dominatrix, but I have an opportunity now to sort of shift their thinking, shift their word choice, get them to understand that, like, okay, you're attracted to Asian women or Asian people. That's fine. But you also need to like do the work in regards to seeing the uniqueness of individuals, to not clump us all together, to not say things like, oh, are you Chinese? And actually say like, oh, if you don't mind me asking, what's your ethnic background, right? Compared to where are you from? So it's okay to ask certain questions, but there's a way of asking them and saying them. And it's also like, don't dehumanize me, we're not all the same. And so I take it as an opportunity to educate. If I can educate someone and help them shift their thinking a little, help them expand, help them, refine how they speak and communicate, then, that's a great thing.
Yeah, it's about respectful engagement, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah. And so it's, but it's definitely, I've definitely had situations where I've had to swallow it for a sec and be like, okay, this is just work. I'm not going to get upset about like this statement, right? Because at the same time, even as a dominant and even in the line of work, I still run a business. And so I can't just sit there and like mouth off to every single thing that I feel upset about. This is not one of the, I do this work not only as a way of like, yes, it's a passion of mine, but I have to survive too. It pays my bills. I'm really thankful and happy that I can do a line of work that I love that pays my bills, but it doesn't mean
it's not a carte blanche.
Yeah, like I have to still think a little strategically, and there's not every like fight is worth, engaging in, not every battle is, like I have to pick and choose my battles sometimes. And sometimes one or two ignorant things that are said is not the battle.
Yeah. I thank you for again being so articulate in your kind of framing of this for what is frankly a delicate conversation. So thank you for being so open and honest with me. For those who might not know and only seen the podcast, I am very much a white, I'm non-binary but very mask presenting, blonde, blue-eyed, kind of very, very British kind of. So yes, thank you for taking the emotional labor to explain to me, frankly, your position on that, because again, you didn't owe that to me. So thank you very much for taking that time.
Oh, no, like you're very welcome, but it is also something that like I am also in a very privileged position, in the sense that, if anyone who's, looks me up can see, like I have, yes, a very unconventional job that has a lot of judgment around it, but I can hide that, right? Like I can walk down the street and people are not going to be like, oh, well, she's a sex worker, right? Like I can hide my sex worker-ness, which then, that puts me in a marginalized space, but I can hide that. And unlike, I can't hide the fact that I have Asian eyes. Certain things I can't hide, but I am in a privileged position. There's privileges attached to every aspect of our life. I am privileged to be able to live in a first world country. I am privileged to, be an attractive female, right? I'm an attractive cis female with traditionally attractive features. I am, I'm body privileged in the sense that like I am a slimmer individual. I am privileged in the fact that like I have, and yes, it's a choice, but like I don't have any distinct, I have no tattoos. I have none of these things. I am passable in a lot of spaces. I can change obviously my ethnicity, and that in itself causes issues, but I have a lot of privilege that I recognize. And I'm also really, really lucky to have such an amazing support network. Some I built on my own, but my family I did not build. I was born into a family that is loving and compassionate and open-minded. My sister is the first person I told when I was like, hey, I'm looking at becoming a professional dominatrix. And she was like, that makes sense. She's my best friend. Like I have my family, my family knows what I do. They're super supportive. And I live in New York City, which is it a privilege with how much it costs? Definitely a choice.
My friend's just moved to New York City and he wouldn't say so, but
yeah,
it's a brilliant city to be living in. Yes.
Yeah, and there's open-minded people. I am so lucky to have a partner of the last 4.5 years who is not a sex worker, who's not really even in the kink community, but supports me through and through in my line of work. I'm so lucky to have this partner who is my number one cheerleader, because dating as a sex worker is super fucking hard. I have the craziest story, and that's a whole other podcast, but this is a cis man who in every aspect of the word is very privileged, recognizes it, and is super humbled and supports what I do with 0 ounce of jealousy, and loves the fact that his partner is a dominant boss ass bitch, and he's not submissive either. So like, and that's like what mutual respect can be, and so I understand my privileges and the support I have through and through my life that allows me to take on the labor of educating those that maybe others don't have the emotional or mental energy or capacity to do, because they're just exhausted from having to deal with their day-to-day world.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I don't think I can say enough. Thank you. To use the word, it's been a massive privilege kind of speaking to you. Obviously we spoke via email a fair amount beforehand, but we hadn't actually like spoken, right? This was part 2 of the screening process. So I was a little bit unsure how this kind of conversation would go, but you've been so open and kind of just lovely to talk to. So
thank you for having me on.
That's right. We'll put all of like any call outs, any socials, any shout outs to anyone or anything that you want will be in the show notes. And we will we'll do whatever we can to kind of help you in this. But I'll say goodbye and we can stop recording. So thank you, and I'll catch up with you soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you found that conversation as fascinating as I did. I hadn't intended when we started for it to go on for nearly an hour and a half, but my God, it was so interesting. This is the edited version. The conversation we had went on for so much longer. So I just want to kind of thank Lucy. You can see all of her socials and her ways of contacting her, even booking her if you're so keen and based in New York, or online, I guess, in our podcast notes. Give us a follow on all of our usual kind of social media, so YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Next week we have one called Allergic to Bad Kink, where we're talking with an anonymised friend. It'll all become clear, I promise you, friend of Queer Disrupt, discussing about the stigma attached to BDSM and how and what that means. Don't forget, the survey will be out next week as well, and this is the opportunity to feedback on things that you like about this. Do you prefer the seasons? Do you like standalone episodes? How are you finding it? What do you want to hear from Queer Disrupt generally? So with that, I shall leave it, and we'll catch you all next week.